This is the Self-Taught or Not podcast with
Dylan Israel
and Eric Hanchett, where we teach you the do's and don'ts of software development from two software development professionals, one self-taught and one not.
Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and that is college. I think that college in the world that we live in now is different than it was 15 or 20 years ago. And let me preface this that I am not a credentialist. I just learned this word the other day. That's someone that overemphasizes on diplomas or degrees, giving jobs or conferring social status. If you have a degree, I think everybody should be really judged on their merit, what they can produce and use. But I think there is value in a degree, and specifically a CS degree. So today we're going to talk about just kind of a smorgasbord of college topics. And we're going to just talk about what it's like to be in college, what people in the development community say about college degrees, especially CS degrees, and kind of the pros and cons of it all as well. And I full disclosure, I have a CS degree from the University of Nevada, Reno. I know Dylan is like 2 credits shy of getting his CS degree, but he dropped out, something like that. Is that right?
Yeah. I have in total around 216 completed credits in college and no degree in anything.
Which is kind of funny. I mean, he could get like 2 degrees if you just probably take a few more classes. But that's neither here nor there. So I think this is kind of interesting too. I've been seeing a lot of threads lately on Twitter about college degrees, especially in the development community. I kind of want to start off with this blanket statement that you don't need a college degree or a CS degree to become a programmer or developer, or to be a programmer or developer. We're not in an industry where you need to get that piece of paper to become something. It's not like a doctor where you can't be an MD unless you probably pass the board, a certification, or you can't become a lawyer without getting your JD. But this is an industry where we welcome everyone and all, and you don't have to have one to become a programmer developer. And I think this is a common used straw man argument. A lot of people use that everybody wants you to have a CS degree, but that's not true.
Yeah, I understand the mentality as somebody who doesn't have one and has looked at job requirements, and usually it's in the required column, and for the most part, every job I've ever been hired at has asked for a CS degree. Whether it's really a reality or not is a separate thing.
That's interesting, because I remember like 10, 15 years ago, I'd look at jobs, especially in my area, and almost all of them would say CS degree required or preferred. I think like preferred, and then they would also have a little caveat or experience. And I feel like depending on the job you look at, most of them don't mention CS degrees, but some of them still do. It feels like it's not as common as it used to be. I mean, did you see your job application specifically still call out CS degrees?
Nowadays, I think it's more likely that it's in preferred. And I would say when it does say it, it's been a while since I've looked at job apps, like probably 6 months or a year, but usually it'll say something degree preferred, and then they're a little bit more broad. It'll say mathematics, engineering, computer science, or related fields. That's usually how I see it.
I like that, related fields, I think at the end of the day, experience really trumps everything. I mean, there's hardly any company out there that would not hire you if you have the equivalent amount of experience in something, especially with so many technologies, so many different stacks out there. If you're really looking for someone that has a lot of experience in Java and Angular, you're probably wanting to hire someone that has 6 years of Java or Angular, even if they don't have a degree at all. It's probably not that big of a deal.
Yeah, I would say that the only companies that I've actually talked with and that have been interested in me are ones that do government contracts, where it's in their contract that there's certain sort of requirements for degrees.
Oh, that's a good point. We're going to mention a little bit about governments and visas and stuff like that in a minute. Kind of going back to when I look at Classic, this is not this issue with college and CS degrees has been around forever. I remember reading Joel Spolsky. If you don't know him, he used to write on this popular blog called Joel on Software. He also created Stack Overflow and Trello, and he has his own consulting company, his own company. And one thing he used to blog about is how he hires people, and he always said two traits that he actually wrote a book on this, that he likes to look at when he hires people is people that are smart and can get things done. So I like to think of that as another good indication. So if you don't have a degree but you're smart and you can get things done, you probably are have a good advantage of getting a job. Now, when you think of getting things done, you kind of need history to show that you've gotten things done. So if you were just like, yeah, I get things done, but you've never worked anywhere, you've never really accomplished anything, you don't have any GitHub repo that shows everything you've done, then you're probably not going to be really thought of as a person that can get things done. And also, smart is very subjective, I guess. Obviously, companies aren't trying to give you IQ tests, but they do give you hard problems. Especially a lot of companies will give you take-home assignments or the whole algorithms and whiteboarding. That's a way to kind of determine how well you're going to work at a job. I used to take a psychology class in college, and one thing they said that one of the best indications of performance in a job is your general mental ability, which is kind of interesting. Just really people that kind of are smarter actually do really well, especially in information jobs.
Yeah, I mean, I think naturally to say that, you don't need to be a brain surgeon or a rocket scientist or something like that to do our jobs, but any job is going to require a certain level of intelligence. And when you're working within, loops and you're doing basic algebra and basic math, there is some logical functions that you're going to need some intelligence to do the job.
Yeah. And not to just, I mean, there's also different sorts of intelligence too, which we're not going to get into, but I would say emotional IQ is important as well. So this is sort of a very controversial subject, I think, in general, just college degrees in general. I remember just recently seeing a Twitter thread that said, you don't have to have a CS degree to become a developer. Stop the effing gatekeeping. Stop the fucking gatekeeping. I was like, and it had hundreds of comments and hundreds of retweets, and they were all really positive. A lot of people coming out of the woodwork saying, I don't have a CS degree. If you required people with CS degrees to become a developer, like half the open source projects out there would fail. Dan Abramoff, the creator of React, piped in once that said that his team at Facebook has 7 developers, and this was a couple years ago, that work on React, and only one of them had a computer science degree. So I think and I think almost all of them had a degree of some kind. But I think the general idea is that, we don't want, in this community, we don't want to gatekeep people. We don't want to stop people from getting in because they don't have CS degrees. But I think there definitely is a value in a CS degree. And I think in some ways, employers can, if they like, stop people that don't have CS degrees from applying, or they can still apply, but maybe they don't get to the next level. I think that's okay, especially when you look at their resumes. So let's give an example. So if you have 2 people that are applying for an entry-level development position somewhere, and one has a CS degree and one doesn't, with all things equal, I think it's perfectly okay for an employer to put the person with a CS degree over the person that doesn't. Now, that may sound unfair, but I think that's the way the world works, and I think that businesses can basically discriminate that way. They can discriminate. Now I think that if one person is like a Dylan, who has, he's done hundreds of YouTube videos, he's self-taught himself, he's worked his butt off, and then you have a guy that just has a CS degree. Now, I don't think that's right. But I think if all things equal, I think CS degree does matter, and it should put you on top of the pile, at least with all things being equal. What do you think, Dylan?
I mean, I don't think it's a realistic scenario, given it. I mean, yeah, if all things are equal, I mean, they're not. right? Because you've gone and you've spent 4 years studying items that are related to software engineering, even though, we all can agree that you're going to have to be self-taught in some form or fashion because you're going to learn maybe some fundamentals, but definitely not the tools and technologies that are there. So if you're taking somebody who knows nothing versus somebody who spent 4 years studying fundamentals and some of the items that maybe don't use on a day-to-day basis but will help, then yeah, things aren't equal. And in my case, when I say, hey, I dropped out of college, I you need to stand out in certain ways, whether it's certificates or projects or whatever it is, but because things aren't equal in that circumstance, so you have to figure out a way to equalize it.
So you think, well, yeah, I can understand that. I guess it depends on the scenario and the person. I think the scenario that a lot of self-taught developers think what's going to happen is they're going to go to a job interview, they're going to have 5 years of experience, and then one guy that has maybe less experience to them but has a CS degree ends up getting the job because they have the CS degree. And I'm sure that maybe sometimes happens, but I don't think, just anecdotally, I think employers still really value that experience more than the degree. And that it's more the scenario that we have someone that maybe has been self-teaching themselves for 6 months, but that, or maybe they've done it for a year or two, still haven't landed that job, and then they come in and into a job interview with someone with a CS degree who may end up being vaulted above them. And I also think too that employers, at least nowadays, it's a little crazy in the last few weeks, but for the most part, there's this need for CS. There's a need for developers, all sorts of developers. However, these employers, especially if they put any position that looks junior, are getting flooded by people that are looking to get a job. And there has to be some sort of way that they can be not biased. Obviously, we don't want to discriminate against somebody, based on the religion, looks, whatever. But they want to be able to categorize people in a certain way and be able to make the best decision. And they can't interview thousands of people. So using a computer science degree definitely, I think, is okay.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have to use something, right? Again, it goes back to it's just one of the many. I think where a lot of people get an issue is, and we tend to notice things that we don't have, right? Like if you're doing React, all you're gonna see are the Angular jobs that are out there. If you're doing Angular, all you're gonna see are the React jobs that you aren't qualified for. Again, I think it comes back to people and companies not using it as the one defining rubric, and instead understanding that it's just part of the puzzle. So you have to figure out what the other parts are and make up for that in various ways.
So do you think it's okay for HR departments to maybe vault people that have a CS degree into the short stack of people they want to interview? Or does it just depend on circumstance and who those people are?
I mean, I think companies can do whatever the hell they want. Like, do I think it's a good idea? I mean, it's debatable, but I've been in this position, right? I've been in the position where people just won't even consider me today because of the fact that I don't have a degree, and it's something that's been changing. It's sort of a case by case basis, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if I think it's okay or not okay. It's somewhat a reality of the world for organizations because these are private companies and they can hire who and what type of person they want within legal standards, right? You can't hire based off of race, ethnicity, age, or religion or anything like that. But one thing that people and government has said is okay is based off of educational background and experience. Now, I think you're going to lose out on some good candidates when you take a very black and white stance with it. But to say that you shouldn't use it as some sort of grading criteria, I think would just be naive.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to thinking that people that have degrees or have education can be, not always, can be better candidates. They can, assuming that they've gone through their studies and they've learned it and they are able to talk about it, that they should have some of the skills needed that employers need to get someone up and running quickly. And that someone who has gone through a 4-year degree has at least been able to accomplish that and been able to stick at one thing for 4 years, which is extremely difficult. I think we can all say that. I mean, a 4-year degree or even a 2-year degree is really difficult to do. I mean, I think the stats are that half the people drop out in most colleges and don't finish. So that should mean something. And I'm going to mention some other benefits too.
I think that's the idea. I don't know if necessarily in practice it's actually correct. Last stat I saw is that something like 70% of college students admit to cheating. So I mean, and I mean, part of my issue with college has been in the past is that it doesn't actually test you skill wise. In my opinion, it's more about can you memorize something in a 1 to 4 week period and well enough to be able to answer a question about it. And I think that's a lot of college. It's a lot of memorization rather than maybe building things, projects, or really understanding core concepts, because you're just being so overwhelmed with general ed and so many other things that in theory, right? If we lived in a perfect world, that would be a very valid statement. But the joke that I've had from numerous hiring managers who've had CS degrees and whatnot is that oftentimes what they end up seeing is that the CS degree candidates are usually a little bit underqualified because they compared to maybe non-CS degree candidates, because the non-CS degree candidates had to sort of do some of these items where they had to learn rather than so that in a more practical sense, I guess.
I think there's some truth to that. I think it just really depends on the individual, the curriculum, the college that they go to. I mean, anybody could skate through college for 4 years, just memorize the basics, and graduate and really not know anything after 4 years. But if you're in a good curriculum, or especially with computer science, which tends to be a more difficult degree to get, there's more chances that someone can graduate with a CS degree and be able to do a lot of stuff in the job world. I mean, this is kind of an interesting subject. I think we all both have anecdotal evidence on both sides of people we've met with hiring managers that either felt all their CS degree candidates weren't very good, or maybe some of them thought they were amazing. I think the answer probably lies in the middle on some of these things, and depends on the person. I kind of want to move on from that and mention also that the CS degree world, though, has been doubling. I mean, a lot of people think that the self-taught world is doubling, but the undergraduates majoring in the subject has more than doubled from 2013 to 2017 to over 106,000. So a lot of people are getting into CS degree. And I'm assuming, too, if we have a recession or downturn, I bet you a lot of people are going to go back to school. It always seems to tends to that's what happens. We'll have even more people in the CS world. It's also worth noting that historically, CS graduates are not diverse. It's, at least in the United States, I can't talk about international, but women are very underrepresented versus the general degrees out there. Like liberal arts is probably, women are higher represented, while the computer science degrees is lower represented. I think engineering is about equal. So that's kind of a problem too. And there's a lot of historical data on that. There's a good book I was reading the other day about this, about women in tech, that we just need to get better at. But let me tell you a few things and a few reasons why I think why it's a good reason to get a CS degree in general. And of course, you can get a lot of these things from other places, but it's nice that this is all in one place. And that is, first, obviously, networking, internships. I would say, if you are in college now or thinking of going back to college, make sure internships are high on your priority list. Companies, especially bigger companies like Microsoft and Google and Facebook And all the FANG type companies always have internship programs. They'll usually even fly you out to live in like a dorm like setting with other interns. You can work all summer on a project. It also looks really good on your resume. These opportunities usually aren't available for self-taught or bootcamp developers. It's very rare for these bigger companies to offer them. And even smaller companies in your town usually offer internships for college kids because they're usually cheap labor. I think your mileage may vary. I know Dylan got an internship at a company. He didn't I don't think you were in college at the time. So some companies do offer internships without being in college, but it just depends. Yep. Is that right, Dylan?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, I took the quarter off or the semester off at the time, but I mean, the company I interviewed wasn't like Google or internet, wasn't a Google or Microsoft. But it's interesting thing about internships. I don't think we've done a podcast on internships themselves. That might be a good one to talk about because I have some opinions about that probably aren't too relevant. But yeah, so I was having this conversation with Engineer Truth or Matt Tran about college, and he's sort of anti-college, a little bit like myself, and his general idea is that people go to college for 4 years, spend $50,000 just to make friends, and so I wonder how true that is when we talk about the network effect. Like, is it the networking we're going for, or is it just sort of the community aspect and the social life aspect?
Well, I think there's more than just paying $50,000 to make friends. There's I've listed here a few more that I think are other positives, at least considering a CS degree itself. But I think it's worth noting that it is a good opportunity to meet other people. Some degrees is better than others. Like I took an MBA. I've been in an MBA program before, and that is a lot more networking. While a CS degree, you tend to get I guess if I could generalize and stereotype a little bit, you may get a little bit more introverted people that that aren't really known for socializing and networking. But I would say some of the best students in the classes I took when college were all network and connected together. We were all on each other's Facebooks. We were all talking. We had study groups together, and then after we all graduated, I knew where each one of them went. I could have emailed any of them up and talked and asked them to help me get a job at the place they got a job at. Some of them went to get their master's degrees. So that was an important part of it. Probably not as important as maybe some other degrees, but I thought it was important. And of course, internships as well. Let's talk about problem solving. This is kind of nebulous, I guess, concept, but in a good CS curriculum, you're going to have lots of problems to solve. And so you're going to have to do some of the things you do day to day when you get your job. A lot of times the professors, especially for the higher end CS courses, they'll give you a concept, but you really need to dig in and how to do it, especially in the programming classes. They may explain to you how to create a linked list or some sort of data structure, but you really are going to learn by doing, and that's going to take some problem solving, and I think that's important to know. There's definitely the curriculum itself should have some algorithms and data structures, and we'll talk about a typical curriculum at Stanford. But algorithms and data structures, I think those are important because those are things that you're going to be using your day-to-day jobs for the most part. I mean, everybody's going to deal with lists of some kinds, maybe a queue, maybe not necessarily like linked lists, but you're going to probably deal with objects and arrays. And algorithms are great too for certain situations. You may see them more if you are going for a job interview, especially at a FANG type company where these algorithms are very common to use. This is funny. Dan Abramoff, the creator of React, actually doesn't have a CS degree, and people were asking him. He was saying, like, my team doesn't have a CS degree. We only have one person has a CS degree. And then everybody's like, well, why does Facebook ask all these CS algorithm type questions? And he kind of had to like take a step back. He's like, oh, well, they actually have two types of interviews. One is for a front end developer, and that's not as CS heavy. And then they have our normal software engineers, which is CS heavy. And then someone's like, one guy's like, well, I interviewed for the web developer job at Facebook, and it still had asked me about graph traversals and arrays. And he's like, oh yeah, we still have to deal with that because that's like the DOM. And I was thinking, yeah, I guess, but that's still more of a CSE type question. I thought that was funny.
Yeah, I mean, he's just shilling for Facebook. I mean, anyone who tells you that like you need to deal with tree traversals and things like that because it's the DOM is just. I mean, let's be real here, right? Like, come on, man. We know that's not right. But to your previous point about the to play sort of devil's advocate, what I think a lot of people would say about you go to school, you learn these data structures and algorithms, is that nowadays probably so much content is available online to do that going into a degree program to benefit from that seems like a very large cost. There's courses, there's sites. You have even have MIT has a bunch of free courses on that very subject that you can go and take to sort of do some of that stuff. You got books, Cracking the Coding Interview, to help you with all that craziness, which I still need to read. I need to finish reading that.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, this is funny because there is so many resources out there, but I still think a lot of self-taught developers and bootcamp grads struggle with algorithms and data structures, and interviews where they ask those questions, they still have a hard problem with it. While it almost benefits more CS graduates or people who just recently graduated with a CS degree when they have those type of interviews, because at least they've had a whole semester, which could be 4 or 5 months studying it, and they probably hopefully pass those classes. But you're right, the information's everywhere. It's just a different way of learning it. Good programs also help with job placement and internships. I've already mentioned internships, but usually you'll get a counselor or a job placement person in your program that you can meet with before you graduate. Sometimes professors themselves will help you try to get a job. At least was like when I was an undergrad. They're also really push graduate school, and then if you're lucky, that's the path that you want to take, you can actually work for a professor and get your tuition either halved or free because you're kind of a student worker. So
did you find that they were any help for you? The sort of in terms of getting in the job market? Because I again, anecdotal evidence, but I've had several people who have been mentored by me, and that was one of the sort of items that from their programs they had some big critiques about.
So the one I had was, well, they did it two ways. They had, I'm trying to remember far back, but they had a job board, which a lot of companies locally would post on. And so that helped. It was kind of exclusively for our CS department, so we could always look there, and that was a good place to find out what jobs we're looking for. And they were specifically, a lot of companies in Reno were they like graduates. They like computer science graduates that graduated from UNR, so those graduates would get preferences, which was nice. And then I remember I was a part of the Association of Computer Machinists. I think I've mentioned that before, ACM. And we would work with local companies in town. We would put on hackathons, which is funny because what we did in those hackathons is pretty much what a lot of companies do now with whiteboarding interviews. And they were definitely, for people who won those hackathons, people who participate, they were definitely more willing to look at your resume when you graduated. That's actually, I got an interview out of that, so that helped out. And then I remember my professor emailing us a few times about different positions he had. I never went to a counselor, though, and talked to one of the job counselors and asked them to help me get a job. I remember the dean of students also had like connections to the community, and sometimes he would help students. So I think it's more structured now, but it was just like a lot of different things you had to know about. It wasn't like one simple place. I think it's better now. To that point, I actually, after I graduated, I had a job and I wasn't even looking because I had an internship. And then I graduated, and 4 months after I graduated, the internship ended and I didn't have a job anymore, and I didn't have access to those resources, which was kind of a bummer. Let's talk about So we talked a little about interviews, that some of the curriculum in a CS program will help you with your interviews. I think we both can agree that we just talked about gatekeepers and HR, and I think we're kind of in agreement that it should be maybe one of many things a company uses as a rubric to help hire you. But I think I'm a little more strongly agree that it's okay for companies to to put people with a CS degree in the top of the pile, at least with all things considered. So that's definitely that definitely helps a gatekeeper, and definitely it's definitely typical. I don't know if this is true, but typical non-CS degrees holders go into web development. Once again, I don't have evidence on that, but it feels like, at least from what I see, that a lot of these boot camps, a lot of these self-taught programs really focus on web development. It seems like this is the easiest way to get into programming and development. But that has a caveat that if you try to move into fields that are a little bit more data heavy, like data science or AI, that not having a CS degree will probably hurt your prospects of moving. What do you think about that, Dylan?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're grasping a little bit here. I mean, I think statistically speaking, you're probably correct when you talk about data science, but I don't even know if a CS degree is really what they want for data science. They want almost mathematics, economics, finance, something a little bit more data heavy. And I think I don't think it's necessarily a fair assumption to say that most non-CS holders go into web development. I think probably if we just looked at the overall industry, you could probably say the same thing about CS degree holders, that a good portion of them go into web development, mainly because there's a lot of jobs in it. And that seems to be like in the last 15 years or so. I mean, pretty much everything's been web development. I just reviewed Code Complete 2 for a video, and my main critique about it is that it talks about a lot of stuff that's a little outdated. Most of us aren't going to be writing software regardless of our backgrounds for hardware. Like, it's just not, there are going to be jobs in that, and there always will be, but most jobs that people are going into from any background, I think, is probably going to end up being web development.
I will say, though, that we had this conversation before we started recording, that the back end, like, people think web development, but you need a back end for web development. You need to connect to an API. It just doesn't poof out of air. And I'm not saying Dylan's saying it does, but so if people are going into web development, they still need developers to jump into Rails. They'll need Amazon guys, Google guy, running into Amazon's S3 and I'm just trying to think of back-end programming languages, and Express and Node and all that. So you need people to do that too. So I think I don't know, do you think there's more? Like, if you have a team and you need to create a web app, you'll need 2 people in the back end and 2 people in the front end. Like, you can't get past that. Maybe in 10, 20 years from now, when everything's a service, and then that would be different, but you're still going to have people do the back end.
Yeah, and I think you have that. I don't think web development, when I say web development, I don't necessarily mean just the front end. I do think it's probably true that people who are learning web development and learning and get into this field probably start with the front end, just because it's an easier learning path when you can see something visually where you're succeeding or failing. But and I think this is a general tendency of developers, period, is sort of use all these plugins and tools and microservices that you can use to essentially not have to abstract away a portion of the application. Firebase as we were talking, is a great example of what a lot of people use. They just use Firebase. I don't care about learning the back end. And kind of one way a lot of boot camps have gone in the direction of is full stack JavaScript, because of it lends itself well to agile and quick changes, but also it makes the transition there a little bit easier. And I think a natural path for a lot of people is, as you go and start your career, like I'm about 4 or 5 years into my career, and every year I somehow seem to be diving more and more into DevOps, because it's the nature of the beast. You just start doing a little bit more in a different area, and as you go and become truly full stack, you start branching out piece by piece.
Yeah, I think that's what I meant. I guess I said web development, but I really mean front end development. Yeah, so I think more kind of non-CS degrees, self-taught no degrees at all, love web development. It's a great starting point. But a lot of people with CS degrees really like the back end too. There's definitely exceptions all over the place, of course. And so, and I do really believe that data science, I don't know, I haven't looked up the latest information on data science. I think having a well-rounded math, statistics, maybe also having a computer science degree is a good background for that. And at least having a degree, I think, is almost needed. Let's move on to visa issues. So here, I can't speak for other countries, but at least in the United States, there's an H-1B visa lottery system that a lot of tech workers get hired from. A lot of companies hire internationally for highly qualified specialized fields like development and programming. And it's really, really difficult to get an H-1B visa without a college degree. Even what I would say is if you are not in the United States, you may find a local branch, especially if you have an international, multinational company like Facebook. They might have an office in your country or an office in a country that has less strict guidelines on who they allow green cards and visas for. So, I mean, it's really difficult if you're self-taught to then get a job at some company that's going to hire you in the United States without a degree. And
yeah, and I think,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think I saw some exceptions for if you have lots of work experience. I'll say that that's the only exception, is that if you're highly talented and you have a pretty good work experience, that may help you. But our lottery system right now is really hard to work in the United States.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we should definitely talk about, or make note of rather, is that most of our experience is from the U.S. And from the U.S., it's, I've been at conferences as recent as a few months ago, before the world was on fire. And one of the questions asked by one of the European business owners is, "What's the main difference you see between like Europe and the U.S. when it comes to software engineering?" And his comment was that the U.S. seems much more willing to have sort of self-taught developers without degrees, while Europe is still holding on to that standard much tighter. And it's worth mentioning that if you're going down whatever path, that you have to take these things into consideration because they're sort of the reality of your environment.
Yeah, and it also, if you live in a socialized country like Canada or UK or somewhere else, your college may be completely paid for. So maybe that's an easier decision for some people, because now we're going to go into the negatives of going to college. I came up with a few. I'm sure that Dylan's a little bit more negative than me on college or anti-college, so maybe he has a few more. But I think the biggest thing that everyone always mentions about college is money and time. Just it takes, unless, and of course you can get scholarships and you can get loans to help pay for college, but usually it's generally thought of as a pretty expensive endeavor. I mean, it could take 4 years. You're paying $10,000 a semester. You could usually end up paying $40,000, and even in cheaper colleges, it's probably $5,000 a semester. So it's a big income. It takes a lot of money, and I think we all have a bad taste in our mouth from all these companies that have loaned students money, and we all know that you can't even declare bankruptcy to get rid of your student loans. They're there forever and ever, and you will have to pay them off. And if you don't, the government will actually take it out of your paycheck, at least in the United States. So that is a big issue for a lot of people. I kind of think of it as an investment in myself. I've bought. I'm probably not unlike Dylan. I've spent $300, $400, $500 on courses that taught me something for 10 hours. I've spent my own money. I actually worked all the way through college. My dad helped pay for maybe the first year, and I pretty much paid for the rest. So I worked 20, 30 hours a week I did have an internship at a company that really helped paid for a lot of my expenses. I lived in a really crappy apartment, and I paid for it myself. I went to a state college, so it wasn't as expensive as some of these private colleges, of course, or one of these bigger colleges. But that's definitely a negative for a lot of people, and it's tough.
Yeah, and that's sort of my number one thing I would say if people, they tell you, well, college sort of gets you a leg up and whatnot. And my response typically to that is one I should say that I don't necessarily think you should do self-taught or go to college. I think you should decide what works best for you. I think that's worth mentioning because I spent enough time in college that I can tell you pretty much that it's not the how environment I'm going to thrive in, and self-taught or boot camp or whatever route you go in may not be the environment that you're going to thrive in. I know, like for instance, my ex-girlfriend, she does very well in that environment. But one thing that I would sort of say is that it's very true that the degree is going to help you out in your life, but there is a time and financial aspect, and even if you're somehow able to eliminate the financial aspect, the amount of time that you could invest, if you took the same amount of time and invested it in your own learning and in your own projects, I'd probably imagine that you could be in a pretty similar position. But that takes a lot of self-discipline, and that's probably one of the harder things about being self-taught and going your own route.
Yeah. I've heard people say too, like, well, if I just worked for 4 years and then came out of working for 4 years, I would have a lot more money and I'd have just as much experience. And to that I always say is I did the same thing. I worked for 4 years as a developer while I was going to school, and I have a degree. So obviously that was tough working. I could only work 20, 30 hours a week when I'm going to school. And I don't necessarily recommend that for everyone either. Like Dylan said, you have to kind of know yourself to know if that's the right path for you. Maybe you're a person that needs to be full-time in school with no other distractions to do well. And actually, I think also working while going to school hurt my GPA a little bit. I definitely struggled a couple of semesters when I was juggling too many things and I didn't turn in all the assignments I needed to do. So that's the thing to keep in mind. One other quick anecdote about this. I just did a really amazing 5-week coding Vue class called Vue 360. We recreated 5 different projects. I did tons of one-on-one calls with people. I was doing a live call every week, answering emails. And at the end of the time, everybody was really happy. It went really well. I sent a survey to my audience. I have an email list where people can sign up. If you guys are interested, go to course.vuecourse.tech, by the way, as a little plug. And at the end of the 5-week course, I emailed everyone that did not take my course, that had not signed up for it, and asked them what are the biggest reasons why. I asked them what are the biggest reasons why you didn't take the course, and the number 1 and number 2, just like everybody says about college, was money. They didn't have the money and they didn't have the time. And I think like those are 2 things that are universal for everything in life. Like none of us have enough. Like anytime you want to buy something, it's either you don't have enough money or you don't have enough time to do it. It just seems like a universal thing that happens everywhere. Everyone says those 2 things, and you just got to be able to put your priorities straight and what's most important to you at the time.
Yeah, it's very true about a lot of things, and if you ask anybody why they don't work out, the first thing they'll tell you is time. And like you sort of, you have to find the time, right? You have to make it a priority. You have to figure out what sacrifices you have to make, right? And like I've joked that I've traded a 6-pack for 6 figures because I had to the time. I used to go to the gym 3-5 times a week. For my entire life until I became a developer and started studying development. And that was where I got that time. So you sort of have to sacrifice certain parts of your social life or whatever it is if you really want to, make yourself successful, whatever route you go.
Good point. Here's a couple of other things. Lots of jobs don't require a college degree. So some people say, why bother? If the job doesn't require it, why even do it? Or if it doesn't even suggest it, some jobs don't even mention it any longer in their job descriptions. It's the computer science programs are usually heavy in math. So usually you have to go up to a certain level of calculus and differential equations. A lot of times you have to do physics in a lot of sciences. And trust me, if you weren't very good in math or sciences in high school, you're going to struggle really hard in college because a typical computer science curriculum is heavy on those two things. And you may think you never need to use it. You may not use it in your day-to-day job, but you definitely need to be able to pass those classes to get a CS degree. And they can be very difficult for a lot of students. They're probably some of the hardest classes in college. And then a lot of topics, and on that point, a lot of topics may not relate to your job. So if you're going to college fully for the experience of getting a job, you may be kind of upset that you need to take these classes that you are not going to use in your job. Like you might actually have some holes in your practical knowledge. I mean, to Dylan's point earlier when he said how he talked to a hiring manager and they're talking about some computer science people that didn't know some topics, that could be true. And it's definitely a lot of the classes are heavy in computer theory. So you're going to get a lot of history of computing and some things that were taught earlier in kind of how we came up to things today. To one caveat to those two, though, especially about topics that may not relate to the job, English is really important. Being able to write is really important. I don't know how many times, probably not that many, but it feels like I've dealt with a lot of programmers who cannot write. They write terrible comments that have misspellings and things don't make sense. And granted, I used to be one of those a long, long time ago as well. Or they can't write emails that make sense, or they have typos in them everywhere. If you haven't learned how to write and communicate and learn how to put the right punctuation, and the differences between there, and there. And I'm not talking about like in a chat, but actual formal emails in your company. You may want to take like a regressive English class, or maybe learn how to do that. I think those are really important things. I've done hundreds of papers throughout my years in college and graduate school, and that has really helped me a lot. And I've even written a couple of books, and that's helped me write better. But that's a skill that, as a developer, you should learn how to do.
I mean, yeah, but if you didn't learn that by doing, I mean, how many years of school do you do? So, I mean, you start reading and writing at what, like age 6? And then you graduate high school at age 18. If you can't learn how to write a sentence and write an email, I mean, you're just a moron. College isn't going to help you. You're just going to waste your time and energy, right? So, like, if you had to if you had to go to college, how many papers, and I mean, all you do is take English, history, and math for about 15 years, it feels like, or maybe 12 years. It's 12 years of schooling to get out of high school. If you can't get that done after 12 years of English, history, and math, and then everything else they throw in there, I mean, I don't know if college is going to do it for you.
You'd be
something's not
surprised.
clicking.
You'd be surprised how many people just can't write an email to their boss without a typo or something that doesn't make sense on it.
Oh, I know. I have no doubt. I'm just saying I don't think college is going to solve that issue for you. I just think something else. I mean, but here's the thing: is why keep doing something that's clearly not working? You've done an English class, as an English and writing class. I mean, unless you've matured to the point where you're like, you know what, I'm an idiot. I need to. This is causing me so much pain that I'm going to put the time, effort, and energy in. In that case, there's various ways you can go about it, but college is one of them. But I don't know that. I mean, I would hope that you can do these things before college. That's all I'm trying to say.
Well, I could say for personal experience, I wasn't the greatest writer, and I've definitely gotten better throughout the years. Definitely college helped, and writing helped. I will say that if you're listening right now and you're like, oh crap, the last 2 emails I sent to my boss, I had a typo. I'm not trying to throw you under the bus. That I've done the same thing. Like, we always make typos every now and then, but just trying to, if that's kind of a normal communication issue that you have, you may want to consider taking some kind of remedial English class.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it is. I mean, I get advertisements for Grammarly every freaking YouTube video I watch, it feels like. And as far as spelling goes, I'm not a very good speller. I've been so dependent on spell checking, so much so that I think I did this video, but I installed a package called C-Spell into every project I work on that is actually a spell checker for your application, so that you avoid some of those issues and variable names, method names, comments, the whole deal. because you do go fast in development a lot of times, and some of us aren't the best spellers. So there are some of these things you can do to maybe make your life a little bit easier.
I've never tried this. So C-spell doesn't just go through your commit messages; it goes through the actual code, like before you check it in.
Yeah, so C-spell is a VS Code extension that will highlight it in your IDE, but it's also a in the background of that, there's a npm package for it. And the way that I use it in my current projects is essentially I've set it up so that I use a Husky for Git hooks. So before you do a commit or a push, it runs the C-spell package that then spell checks all the application files that I care about. In this case, the TypeScript, the JavaScript, the HTML, and the CSS, and make sure that everything is spelled correctly. And if not, I can't commit and I can't push, so then we go and fix it.
Nice. Yeah, that definitely can help out, especially if you are struggling in some of those things. But take a little extra, and also just take a little extra time when you write things. When you write a comment, just make sure it makes sense.
Yeah, I will say that if you are sending an email, what I have found has been very helpful. You might catch the spelling mistakes, but the grammar mistakes will probably be the ones that are going to slide through. Is that reading these things aloud, and just read it aloud, because your brain has a weird way of same thing with code, where it just has a weird way of just making it work in your brain. But if you sort of read it out loud, you'll start seeing where there are issues.
Yep, that's a good point. Well, I do have some more information here, but the episode's getting kind of long. There's definitely some quick tips. I'll just rattle off a couple of quick tips. So when you're picking a college, this could be a whole episode of like, how do you pick a college? Like, do you go to a cheap in-state college versus a better out-of-state college? I mean, I think that's a kind of a personal decision. You have to look at how much money you have. Do you have any scholarships? Do you have any ins to different colleges? See what part of where you're in life. If you have any kids, obviously, or you have a significant other, that might change your outlook. Or if you're just graduating high school, I think general, if you're coming out of high school and you have a scholarship, you should usually go to the best school that you can, considering how much, as long as you're not paying for it. If you're paying for it, then you need to work with your parents and figure that out yourself. I don't think there's any really right answer to that. Generally, I always think it's better to go to better programs than worse programs. So if you can have a choice to go between MIT and your local state college, and MIT is somehow open for you, then I would go to MIT. And also keep in mind that if you apply for these larger private schools or these larger, more esteemed colleges, a lot of times they have excellent financial help for students that are low income. Most of the time, if your parents make less than like $50,000, you would almost always get into these colleges for free. Like, they'll pay for you to be there. So don't let that stop you from going to these colleges, thinking that you can't go to Harvard or Princeton or MIT or Yale because you would never be able to afford it. If you do get into those jobs, there's lots of financial aid, and most of the time, if you're low income, you'll never pay anything. And that's something I didn't realize. I wasn't a super excellent student. And by the way, if you are in high school and you are applying for these large or these very esteemed colleges, maybe an MIT or something like that, you're going to have to be at the very, very top of your class to even have a chance to get in. Although a couple of people from my high school went to MIT, and this was in Reno, Nevada. They had a 4.0 GPA, but they were able to get in. So it is possible. You can also look at it. Go ahead.
I was going to say, while we're on the topic of colleges, I'm curious what your thoughts are about this. And this is something that's fairly new, but there are a few colleges that are picking up the ISA model, the income sharing agreement model. Now, it's only for engineering related practices, but I'm curious how you think that might change college, because it changes the conversation in my mind.
Wow. I haven't heard of that. I know in our boot camp episode, we mentioned that a lot of colleges are having their own curriculums that aren't accredited for your degree, but you can get a certificate, and they're teaching like boot camp style classes over the summer, over like 8 weeks or 12-week programs. And usually you have to pay for those like a normal college class, but it doesn't necessarily go to a degree. I haven't heard of this ISA, but just thinking out loud here, I've gone back and forth on ISAs. I used to think they're a great opportunity, but all the negativity that's coming out recently about ISAs and how that some companies are like selling off parts of their ISAs to other companies, so they're not as committed to get their students to pass or to actually get a job, and how a lot of these boot camps now are underreporting the amount of students that are actually getting jobs, and their job placements are 50% or lower. Kind of makes me feel like that some things like that could start happening, which would be really bad. But then again, I'm thinking, well, if it's a reputable college, then maybe this is a good thing. Maybe they would be able to create a good environment and help students, and they should actually obviously know how to teach, and they're accredited. Some states, they won't let, like, Lambda can't operate in the state of Texas because they haven't got the certification to actually teach there. But in other states, they can, because there's no certification. And the college that it's already accredited would be able to teach these programs better. So I feel like I'm optimistic this would work out.
Yeah, I tend to like the idea of an ISA, especially with student loans. One, you don't pay interest on an ISA, which is one of the ways some people never get out of their student loans. They graduate with a degree that maybe isn't a money making degree. So if it causes that issue. Now, this isn't going to solve that, because most of these programs, and I should say that this isn't like a mass, like there aren't a ton. We're talking about maybe 10 colleges that have started doing this. So it's not like this is sweeping the nation by any means, but it's definitely, I see it growing as one solution to the student loan issue that seems to be happening. But I do see that, some people argue that, well, they're only doing it for high income and high demand fields, which in some people's eyes is wrong. In my eyes, it sort of makes sense. Like, I don't know why a lot of people would go for a degree in something that they like. To me, college is an ends to a means. It's a way to go and get a job and in the market and get some skills, and that's sort of what it's supporting. But there's no ISA for art students, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, and maybe that's going to be an issue long term.
Yeah, I mean, that would discriminate against other. I would say, now that you mentioned that there could be other fields that could use an ISA type program, but because graduates of that program don't make as much money as computer science students or developers, then they would be kind of discriminated against. And it also would have people where someone might have a passion for art, or they're an amazing artist or amazing musician, or they really like working with kids. Maybe they want to be a teacher, but they look at a college curriculum and they say, "Oh, I could get an ISA to be a computer science, and I can make $80,000 a year, maybe $100,000 a year after a few years of working. I'm going to go for that." And then we have a huge gap in the amount of teachers that can teach elementary kids now, because those teachers are now taking the ISA to become computer science graduates instead of what they really want to do. And then we get we get more and more crappy programmers and developers joining the workforce that are just in it for the money. And maybe that's a problem too. So I know it's kind of an interesting thought experiment.
Yeah, maybe by season 3 or 4, it'll blow up a little bit more, and we can talk about it in a little bit more detail.
Very cool. All right. Well, that's that's pretty much it. I just wanted to say, we could also, if you're looking for a college, you can look at acceptance rates. I'm just going to wrap this up and say that, I really do think that a computer science degree, I'm going to go out on a limb, say something controversial. I think it makes you a better developer. I know some people totally disagree with that. I think it does make you a better developer. And I think it's a great way for a person that doesn't have any skills, that is, maybe a younger person out there wants to get into this field. I think it's a great way to get your foot into the door somewhere and learn skills that are going to be very valuable for you in the job place. Some of them won't, some of them will. And that's where I come down on it. And to give a little caveat, it's not for everyone.
Yeah. And I mean, I disagree completely. So we'll leave it at that, I guess. I mean, sort of here we are, self-taught or not, right? Like that's the idea. All right. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you want to find more about what I'm up to, go to dylanisrael.com.
And if you want to know what I'm up to, you can check out my website at eric.video. If you haven't already, please leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And if you do, you might even be featured on our next episode. Don't forget to check out the website at selftaughtornot.com. From there, you can sign up for a mailing list where we give away free courses and a bunch of cool stuff. And we'll also let you know when the next episode comes out. And finally, if you didn't know, we have a Facebook group. It's called Code, Tech, and Caffeine. We have over 10,000 members, and you can find the link at selftaughtornot.com. So come join us. We have tons of developers willing to help you guys, mentor you guys. Check it out. Just make sure you go to selftaughtornot.com and check out the Code, Tech, and Caffeine link. Thanks, and take care.